Thank you all for being here. I'd like to call the Arts and Culture Subcommittee meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilor Dakota.
Here.
Councilor Broderick.
Here.
Councilor Mercia.
Yeah.
3 present.
Thank you. And thank you, all the other councilors who are in attendance, Mr. Murphy, Mayor Milanazzo, and thank you to Mr. Palmarian, LZ Noon, and Adam Bakey for being here. We appreciate that. This subcommittee meeting is to discuss a motion made by Councilor Murphy to, in particular, discuss the plans for the Smith-Baker Center preservation. I understand that LZ, perhaps, will be making a presentation.
Both myself and Adam Bakey and Paul Marion will be chipping in on this.
Okay,
so we have
very
some
well.
information.
Please go ahead and start.
Okay, well, we'll want to cover about 3 different things this evening. Adam's going to present a little bit on the history of the building and the uses of the building since the 2003 feasibility report. And then, unfortunately, Michael Creasy couldn't be here, so we'll mention a little bit about what the National Park has been working on. I'll mention a little bit on that. Paul Marion will speak to what the work Cool's been doing to identify grant opportunities and sources, and a community input session we had with local stakeholders. And then Adam will mention some work that we're doing moving forward on this project. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, LZ. See how many more introductions we can do here before we get started. As folks will probably remember, the city didn't divest, we moved the senior center out of the Smith-Baker Center in 2003, and subsequent to that, we commissioned an architect and a code consultant to look at the building and start to give us a sense of what type of framework we would need to work within in terms of converting the building to new uses and enabling it to move forward. And I think what we have all had in mind all along is that the building really is a spectacular building, both in terms of it's sort of like a geode in terms of the beauty of the interior, but also the acoustics of the space in what used to be the sanctuary in the building really are spectacular. So we wanted to really get a handle on what it would take and what would be required to really advance it to be the kind of performing arts facility that we would like it to be from a code and sort of architecture point of view. And the observation that the code consultant made to us, which was a little bit disappointing, but I think a practical reality that we will and can work ahead around, was that the building is not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you spend more than $100,000 renovating a building of this type, you run into a situation where you need to bring the building into compliance, at least those spaces that are open to the public, which essentially is the whole point here. So basically it's the whole building up into compliance. And by the time you spend the money that would be necessary to do that, you start to trigger a whole bunch of other code compliance thresholds. And so you basically wind up with, as soon as you spend $100,000 on the building, you basically need to spend around $5 or $6 million on the building in order to bring it up to code compliance, which, conveniently also means we could probably, for that same money, get very close to a really attractive performing arts facility. So it becomes kind of an all or nothing project to be able to utilize the building in any sustained way and move ahead with it. Now, the good news is I think the capital financing of something like this is not easy. They never are, but it is definitely achievable. I think the greater question that has been out there and has really been the sort of dominant question in the various exercises to look into Smith-Baker before, not the least of which was, former Mayor Caulfield just stepped in, and when he was mayor, he commissioned a task force to look at the Smith-Baker and kind of develop some concepts about how we might be able to move forward, and we're still looking at that, and we can talk a little later tonight about how we're going to continue to move forward on the recommendations of that. But the big question mark in that process, and really continues to be the big question mark, is how do you formulate an operating budget for this facility and a sort of business plan for the operation of the facility that generates enough revenue to basically keep the lights on, keep the doors open, keep the heat on, and so forth, to really be able to use it. And while there is a tremendous amount of interest in the facility, we do need to make sure that we can identify sufficient interest that has some financial capacity to help carry the building in order for it to really ultimately be able to be a successful building. And I'll turn it back over to some of the other folks, and then a little later on I can talk about how we think we might be able to get toward that objective.
And I think Michael Creasy is here to speak a little bit about the National Park's commitment to the building and some significant maintenance that the park has worked on in the last several months and about 2 years.
Yes, welcome, Michael. Thank you for coming, and Mr. Caulfield is also in the audience. Thank you very much for coming. And if you don't mind, at some point I may ask you to speak about the report briefly, your task force report from 2008, after Michael.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. If one has ever visited the Smith-Baker Center, you would know rapidly that there's not an artist that could paint the beauty. It was once a church, and although the acoustics are there to perform for artists, there's still a divine feeling in the building. And in 2008, when I was the mayor, I did form a task force. Jimmy Cook from the Lowell Plan, Council Mayor Milanazzo was on that task force, Michael Creasy, Paul Marion, and many, many other people. And they met, and I think Adam Bankey was part of that as well. And they met and come up with ideas, innovative ideas, and so forth. And they came to the conclusion the only way you could really renovate that beautiful building is for the federal government and other entities to be involved as well, because the city could not afford to do so. And I do know that UMass Lowell and Middlesex Community College was interested in utilizing the building. And we just cannot let that building sit there and deteriorate. And I want to thank the subcommittee for convening this meeting and everyone who was on that task force. They dotted the I, they crossed the T. The only thing left is money. Where do you find the money to address that beautiful building? And for years, the Smith-Baker Center was a senior center where our seniors went to get a hot meal, have a dance, and so forth. And before they could have that dance, everyone had to remove the tables. I know Council Rita Mercier knew all about that. Remove the tables and so forth. It was also utilized by the Salvation Army for the Christmas Tree Fund. And it's a part of our history. And we just cannot, and I don't think the council in the future will let that building deteriorate. And it is still, I believe the upstairs will hold 900 people. And it's an excellent venue, whether you like opera, country western, or you like a good old-fashioned presentation like Amy Black gave us yesterday about Molly the Mill Girl. So I'm hoping we can find alternatives to come up with the money. I'm sorry I'm a little late, but if I may, Madam Chairman, to Adam, how much money are we looking at to address the needs? Did I hit a correct figure, around $4 million?
Well, actually, the number I threw out was $5 to $6 million for the
5 or 6
capital
million.
cost, but I'm optimistic that that's a number that we can potentially find a way to make happen with the right partners. The bigger question remains the operating cost of the building and how the operating of the building,
Yeah.
once some sort of a renovation takes place, can be financed.
Well, I know Middlesex Community College, the old Rialto Theater, where I once went as a kid for 12 cents and saw 3 movies and 3 cartoons and so forth. And it was a bowling alley as well. Middlesex Community College is going to utilize that, and through state funding, federal funding, they're going to turn that into an art center, a performing center. And that there's one example of a historic building being saved and being utilized. Hopefully, we can do the same thing with the Smith Baker Center.
Absolutely. The goal is certainly to do our best to preserve the building, and I think we will hopefully get into some of the specific numbers later. But Mr. Creasy, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, I know that the National Park agreed to button up the building and take care of that to a certain extent. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
It is true that we were strong-armed by the mayor at the time to take care of it before the winter time. That was a couple of years ago now, so that was back in 2009 that we were part of the task force, and we worked with Adam and the DPD folks as well as city maintenance folks on just trying to determine the current status of the building itself. We set aside $20,000 just to make sure that the building was not endangered, if you will. We looked at basic functions of the building. We looked at fire alarm systems, heating, ventilation. We looked at the roof. We looked at windows. We looked at security issues related to lighting, as well as things that were both security related to physical security, but also the security of the building itself. And so what we did is we worked with the city to button it up, if you will, mothball it. Not in a full mothballing sense, but we did want to remove the birds, the pigeons from the building itself. We wanted to make sure that if there were any leaks, that those were addressed. If there was any broken windows, those were addressed. We put in plexiglass. I forget the name of the term, but it's essentially plexiglass over top of the stained glass windows and the access points of the building itself. We replaced some of the slate tiles, and we did some inspections on the terracotta as well. But overall, we basically were very much in a buttoning up mode, if you will, just to prevent it from getting through another winter, possibly 2. I think the commitment at the time, I believe, Adam, correct me, or Elsie, correct me if I'm wrong, but the commitment is that the city would have the heat on, at least in terms of basic heat coverage for the building for that 1 or 2 years, which we suggested was critical to the building itself. But the report that if you don't have, we can certainly give you a copy of the building assessment report that we did in April 2009, which demonstrates what we've done in terms of the mothballing work that we did a couple of years ago.
Thank you very much. And that was done in 2009. Do you know if there's been any return to the Smith Baker by the National Park?
The National
Since
Park
then?
Service has not done anything beyond just trying to get it buttoned up for the winter time back then. So.
Okay. I was in there recently to take some photos of the nativity, and I know noticed that there was some leaking, and I think that perhaps that issue, as well as some other articles in the paper, might have been what spurred this. So I know that the DPW was there with me, and perhaps they had gone in. Where's Bernie? Perhaps they had gone in and looked into that. I'm not sure. But I appreciate you coming and sharing that information with us. Elsie, Paul, members of the subcommittee, would you like to speak, ask questions? Elsie, okay.
Sure. I'll just chime in a little bit on some of the work that Cool's been doing. Back in the fall, we, working with DPD staff, looked into applying for a major grant that would work on sort of establishing that kind of business and operational model under the guise of working at a performing arts center moving forward. Paul Marion will speak a little bit more about that and some of the planning that's taken place since. We worked very hard on compiling this Ford Foundation grant, and the good news was we got a lot of information together that can serve us for future grant opportunities, we hope at a national level. However, unfortunately, this was a highly competitive grant process. It is a multi-year process. Ford Foundation is giving out, I believe it's $10 million per year for 10 years. So there's another cycle coming up, and we did receive strong feedback on our grant. So we intend to submit another application. As part of that application and planning process, Cool recently worked to convene a group of stakeholders, and Paul can speak a little bit more to some of the goals and interests around that.
Sure, thanks, Elsie. You know, it's amazing to sit here in this room and then look just out the window. No one is going to build that building again. And because of the national park legislation, nobody can take that building down. It's protected. The city owns it. Lowell has many amazing traits. Two of them are imagination and persistence. And I think we're here as evidence of those two things tonight. One is the imagination to see what that building can be, and the other is the persistence to see this through. It took 10 years to move from the idea of a national park to the legislation. It's been a long road with the redevelopment of Smith Baker, beginning with the city's study for the possibility of a performing arts center. The Smith Baker building, came up again in the Mount Auburn study for the Lowell plan, the Creative Economy Development Plan. It was listed as a priority for the community. That was followed by Mayor Caulfield's task force. And I think, we're here with Cool now to try to make good on all that work. One of the things that we're very confident of is that there's a strong need and a strong desire to have this building come online. In our meeting 3 weeks ago, we had people from Anchor Dance Troupe, Image Theater, the New England Orchestra, Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, the string program at UMass Lowell, the Lowell Film Collaborative, Light of Cambodian Children, and other smaller arts and cultural groups in the city that don't have a home. They exist, they provide programs, but they don't have a home. We don't have anything like what we're envisioning for Smith Baker, which is a real community arts center. We had Emily Rosenbaum from the Coalition for a Better Acre was at the meeting, and she said, just in CBA residences, there's 400 people who live within walking distance of this building. For them, this could be their community arts center. It would make a fabulous bookend to Lowell Memorial Auditorium at the other end of Merrimack Street. I mean, when you look at City Hall, the library, that building, what an amazing complex you have here. We had Pete Lally, the manager of the auditorium there. We were encouraged by his statement, which was that Lowell needs a venue of this size. Lowell's losing money in its cultural industry because we don't have a high-quality, mid-sized venue where we can bring in the kinds of acts that are not a fit for the 3,000-seat auditorium. The kind of acts that come to the Summer Music Series and the Folk Festival from September through May. We could be having a much fuller cultural menu if we had this building online. I mean, this could really become like Sanders Theater at Harvard in terms of the performance hall there. What's a little bit different is we're also talking about it as a cultural production center, and that's part of the community arts center concept, where this would also be a place that would foster the generation of new products, whether it's film or music or new products of digital art, that this would be a place where particularly younger artists could come and work and bring their ideas and their imagination into the form of actual works of art. Just a comment on the Ford Foundation initiative. The fact that the Ford Foundation is making $100 million available over 10 years in $10 million chunks to encourage the development of community art centers around the United States, I think is evidence that we're onto something that other people think is a good idea. This isn't just something that we think can work. Obviously, folks at the Ford Foundation think this is an important type of initiative that they want to support in communities around the country. Whether we get money for them or not, I think it's an important fact to consider. We have kind of artist conception illustrations here. One of them just so that people can begin to see what a revived Smith Baker Center might look like. We've also been talking about this being the location for a permanent Jack Kerouac exhibit of some type, which would be the starting place for all of the visitors from around the country and around the world who come to Lowell looking for Kerouac and the Kerouac story. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was touring around a couple of travel writers, working with Deb Belanger, one from England and one from Toronto, Canada, both preparing to write stories this fall in connection with the release of the new feature film based on Kerouac's novel On the Road. The Kerouac tourism industry is only going to get bigger. We also feel that this is a strategy that could be to our benefit in terms of fundraising among some of the higher profile film stars and music stars, people like Johnny Depp and Tom Waits, who have been very public about their artistic debt to Kerouac. And we've never had an ambitious enough project to go to folks at that level with. We feel that we could now, approach, some of these folks who, are in a position to make large contributions by doing something significant, as part of this building. So that's part of the development strategy that we're talking about.
Thank you very much for that information. Would either of the councilors on this committee like to ask questions or speak?
No, but thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'd just like to make some comments on this beautiful building. I remember many years ago when the Council on Aging was in there, they more or less used the downstairs and had outgrown its usefulness for that particular purpose for our seniors. But when you go upstairs, it's a jewel. It's a hidden jewel, just like the second floor at the Pollard Memorial Library. And it took $10 million to refurbish the second floor in the library because that in itself was mothballed too. And it's a shame to see this beautiful building just sitting there, and all the years went by. But I can remember that I would go into the Smith Baker Center and the seniors would be there, and one day they'd have heat in the winter and the next day they wouldn't, and they were all there with their coats on, and that's not a way to run a senior center. So I do know the problems there. I know that there's a heating problem and probably needs a full refurbishing of a boiler system, heating system, but to let that go in wasteland and not be able to utilize the upstairs. I remember that Councilor Caulfield had a fundraiser for the city again every time there was a need for some program to be utilized and upgraded and we didn't have the money. Councilor Caulfield would say, let's have a show and raise some money for the city. And I remember former Councilor Grady Mulligan singing up there on the second floor. Councilor Caulfield probably remembers that too. Everybody in the room had the chills. He was just so tremendous. So the acoustics there are second to none. And so I remember the good. I also remember the roof and a woman walking by, and the roof snow just melted and came down and caught that lady and knocked her to the ground. So they needed a guard up there to hold the snow, but it's a shame to just let it sit there. So I'm glad we're all on the same page. I wish there was a group together like the Senior Center, Friends of the Smith Baker Center, so we could have fundraisers each year to generate a fund and put it in the bank specifically for improvements because I don't know where we're gonna get the money to do it. I know it's almost like the combined sewer overflow where you need $350 million from start to finish to get it done. But if we could do a little bit each time, I remember the memorandum of understanding or agreement, whatever, that says we will donate this building to the city for the purpose of using it that suits the needs of the city for everyone, but it can never, ever be turned into another form of a religious group to have this. So it's right where it belongs, to be given to the city and for that specific purpose. But I'm glad we're all working and thinking, because this has to be revitalized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Marion, and then Mr.
Just a
Caulfield,
quick
Councilor
point on the
Caulfield.
financing. If I'm not mistaken, I believe UTEC is raising $7 million to do the addition improvement on the St. Paul's Church. And, you know, my feeling is if UTEC can do this for their project, with the whole cultural community behind this, you know, we should not be daunted, you know, by that figure. I'm very optimistic that we can do it.
I'm optimistic, too, that we can do it, Madam Chairman. I'm thinking when we talked about the arena years ago, the city was going to be funding it all together, but we went in partnership with the university, with the state, with the city. If we could form a partnership as well with UMass Lowell, and you know what the chancellor can do, so that'd be, and it would be, the college could use it as well. It would be a partnership amongst many people.
Councilor Caulfield?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and the subcommittee. I just want to pick up what Paul Marion said about the Ford Foundation and other foundations that want to spend money on good projects such as this. And I was talking with Michael Creasy earlier, and if you look at the report on the Smith Baker Center, you'll see at the very top, 1827, and the city was incorporated in 1836. In 1835, this was just a small rural farm town. But people had the initiative, said, we need a church. And they built the church there in 1827. It did have a fire, and it was rebuilt in 1884. And there's no doubt in my mind, or anyone else's mind, that it's historic. And I'd like to pick up what Paul Marion said about the foundations that are out there. We should probably explore that. And I was talking to Michael Creasy, and wouldn't that be a great venue for the folk festival? To have artists performing in there. People would be in an air-conditioned atmosphere, 1,000 people sitting in comfortable chairs, enjoying a festive folk festival. And we should probably look and research to see if there is some funding out there. And that's probably the way to go, because the federal government is cutting. And I don't think the Smith Baker Center is on their mind right now, so.
Councilor Murphy, do you?
Thank you. Through you through the chair to Adam or Paul Marion or whomever. I guess my question would be, what can we do now at this point to preserve the building in a way that allows us to keep that initial cost, capital cost, at $5 to $6 million, and not raise it to 7 or 8 if you know, certain things are left to deteriorate?
I'd like to, I can address that a little bit, and then I'd like to talk about what we're going to do, or what we're hoping to be able to do in the near term that may get us, move us in the direction of the real goal line, which we're looking for here. I think the most important thing we can do is what we agreed to do with the National Park 2 years ago, which is do our best to keep the heat on. And I give a lot of credit to Jim Green and the crew at the DPW that really work under pretty adverse conditions to make that possible in that building. The boiler is very much on its last legs, but it now has been for 5 or 6 years, and it's a credit to them that they've kept that going as long as they have, and hopefully can keep doing so for a little while. That is probably the single most important thing. The second most important thing is making sure that the roof stays in good shape so that we're not getting significant entry of water into the building, which can rapidly cause deterioration. Now, I think the real objective, though, is not to see how long the city can keep kind of taking a bit of a Band-Aid approach to maintenance and that sort of thing, but figure out how we can move it toward the end goal of achieving this performing arts center that I think everyone really would love to see there. And one of the conclusions of the task force, which I did sit on from a couple of years ago, was that the project is most likely to be made viable if it is actually ultimately led by a private party. And the task force recommendation ultimately was that the city should undertake a public process to solicit development proposals, and the task force concluded that the preferred development strategy lies with the private sector. Part of the reason for that is that you could virtually cut in half that capital cost using tax credits that are available to the private sector that are not available to the public sector. So that immediately starts to change the nature of the capital equation. But the big uncertainty still remains the question of the operating model, and that's the part that no amount of the type of fundraising that we talk about is going to solve. And what we really need is for some folks who have the expertise in this type of operating this type of facility, as well as the expertise in doing private real estate development, to work together to generate that type of a business plan. And there's two approaches to that. One is that we could write a grant, which we have, I think LZ and Cool have been doing a tremendous effort trying to write a grant and get funding for that. Generally speaking, the problem tends to be that we don't get funded because we don't have a business plan. So it's sort of an interesting catch-22 problem there. The other problem with that is that if we are doing that business plan development and we are not the party that's ultimately going to do the development and manage the facility, a whole bunch of assumptions get made along the way in doing that type of planning that may or may not be accurate if you don't have the entity that's actually going to operate the facility at the table. So what we are hoping to be able to do, and we know of some potential interest both in the for-profit sector and in the nonprofit sector in the community, in responding to a solicitation for what would initially be an option on the building as opposed to an outright sale, that would allow some private sector parties, say about a 3-month period, to conduct their own due diligence and craft a fully developed business plan. And if they can convince themselves that there is a viable model, they would then execute an agreement with us to buy the building and proceed with that development project. And so if that general approach is something that is of interest to the council, what we would like to do is go back, and DPD will have an appraisal of the property refreshed. We last did one in 2009. That wouldn't be valid to support something like that right now. Get that out, and then we would come back to the council with a request to issue a developer solicitation, again, consistent with the recommendation of the mayor's task force, that hopefully will meet with some positive reception in the private community and allow us to move ahead with getting someone who would actually implement the business plan to develop the business plan. And I think that with the right people, the right expertise, it can happen.
Thank you very much for that information. I just wanted to say to LZ, we appreciate the hard work that you do in Cool. I know that you have lots going on, that you continue to write grants. We appreciate that, and we know that next time around you'll probably be successful. So thank you for that hard work.
Thanks, and we hope we can get some of those grants as well.
Yes.
Since this is a historic building and there are some agreements here, I don't know that we can actually sell this building. Can we look into the historic significance as far as the agreement that we have many years ago? Because I thought I read somewhere that it should be used as a city entity and not given off to another a religion, which I'm sure we're not doing that. but I didn't think we could sell it off to anybody.
I believe we looked into that a couple of years ago. We will check again. My recollection is the same as yours, actually, that the restriction is against other religious use, but it isn't, there's not an outright prohibition or any deed restriction that would prevent us from selling it, but we will take a look at that.
Thank you again, Mr. Martin. Councilor Martin has joined us. Do you have any thoughts or comments on the questions? Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we appreciate you coming. And this is something that we will do everything in our power to help with and continue to support all the efforts that you're making. We appreciate that, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. So moved.
Thank you.